before we get into this, usually at this point, I would say, as always this week, NWA Powerrr emanated from Atlanta, Georgia in the GPB studios for yet another episode on the official NWA YouTube channel. But this week was slightly different. This week's show didn't really air from the GPB studios. It slightly did, but not really. The majority of the episode was VTs, recap packages. We had Thunder Rosa into the cage segment. We were hyping the pay-per-view Into the Fire, hyping next week's episode. And we also had a match, just the one, which lasted 73 seconds. Yes, you did not just mishear me, 73 seconds. Now, I want to preface this by saying I have just absolutely loved NWA Powerrr so far. This was its 8th episode, and until now it's been a real throwback, refreshing, quality hour of wrestling television. You've had live promos at the podium in front of a studio audience with quality and fun matches in front of a compact, close, quality crowd. You've got none of this frilly WWS sports entertainment. But man, they got, and by there I mean the NWA, got about 8 weeks worth of bad into this episode tonight. Now, of course, you do have a degree of sympathy here, but not a lot, but a degree of sympathy, as this show was, of course, affected by the Jim Cornette controversy last week, who, of course, is no longer with the company after his offensive comments made last week during the episode of NWA Powerrr. After the episode last week, NWA Vice President Dave Lagana released an apology, and later the NWA released a statement that Jim Cornette had resigned, so Cornette is no more with the NWA. If you want to hear my opinions and comments on this controversy, we released a video last week, so a link is in the description box below. So, with Cornette gone, a lot of people were obviously questioning what they were going to do with this week's episode. Of course, all the matches and shows were taped at their TV tapings at the end of September, start of October. So was Jim Cornette going to appear on this episode? Were they just going to redub and redo the commentary? Were they going to mute Jim Cornette's commentary? Well, we found out they just scrapped the whole thing. The only Jim Cornette we heard tonight was recapping previous week's shows that you'd heard a little Cornette on, but that was it. Joe Galli appeared to have re-recorded all of his cameras in a different room that didn't appear to be at the GPB studios in Atlanta. And likewise, we only saw one match, if you can even call it that, which lasted 73 seconds. Yes, on a 1-hour professional wrestling show, we saw 73 hours of fucking wrestling. What a waste of time. This wasn't in front of a studio audience. It was shot in front of an empty GPB studios in Atlanta. It was just Joe Galli doing commentary for this one. But the whole point of the question mark, who appeared in the match, in this empty arena match as they called it, is that the question mark's over with the crowd. You can't have the audience participate in wrestler with no audience. I mean, I suspect that they shot this within the last week, so they had at least some wrestling which was usable. But if that is the case, why not at least let them go 15-20 minutes? Lord knows you've got this time this week you obviously needed to fill. And then that would be all the wrestling we saw this week. The best things about NWA Powerrr have been the studio, the promos, the matches, the crowd. And this week we didn't see any of it. It was like the heart had been ripped out of the program. Now, like I said, I do have an element of sympathy here. But realistically, not a lot of sympathy. You lay down with dogs and you're going to get fleas. This is just as much on the NWA as it is on Jim Cornette. The offensive comments were obviously made by Cornette last week, and he should be ashamed. It's 2019, they have no place in society, let alone professional wrestling. However, those comments were made 8 weeks ago. The NWA had plenty of time to edit them out of the show and avoid all of this. All of it. Just think it could have all been avoided if you'd just taken the comments out of the show. So this is just as much on them as it is on Cornette, in my opinion. So my amount of sympathy on the, oh, well, it's all Jim Cornette's fault that we can't use the matches that we taped, etc., etc. No, it's just as much the NWA's fault. And who suffers the most out of all of this? The fans. The fans are the people that you've built up and up over the last 7 weeks producing this fantastic pro wrestling TV show. And they had to witness one long-ass YouTube recap video last night. And honestly, that's what it felt like. A really, really long YouTube video. Because when it was finished, my first thought was, what a waste of time that was. We got some announcements about Into the Fire. But if you didn't watch NWA Powerrr this week, if you haven't yet watched NWA Powerrr this week, you didn't miss anything. Nothing. Now, they're advertising matches and content for next week, so it would appear that NWA will be back to business as usual by then. I'm assuming they'll be redubbing the commentary or finding some workaround to replace Jim Cornette on commentary. So here's hoping we actually see some professional wrestling on the professional wrestling program next week. We can only hope. But yeah, not good, NWA. Not good. If you make a mistake, or talent makes a mistake, it shouldn't be the fans, your audience, that has to suffer. The minimum you can do to your fans is put on a good show. That is the absolute minimum. Because if you think about it, there's a portion of your audience that was probably really, really offended by Cornette's comments last week. Now, there was a portion that actually weren't offended at all. There's a portion of the audience that are saying that they thought it was harsh that Jim Cornette got fired. I'm not in that portion. I would say I was completely offended by the comments, but I think they were distasteful. I don't think, like I said, they have any place in society, let alone professional wrestling in 2019. So there was definitely a portion of the audience that was really offended by his comments. And their estimation of the NWA has gone down when they heard those comments last week. And then it's gone down even further when they find out that they could have been edited out of the show and they weren't edited out of the show. And then, they might give NWA a chance. So they might think, well, I'll give them another chance. Maybe it was just Jim Cornette. And they watched that excuse for a wrestling show last night. And their estimation of NWA goes down even further. So as 7 days go, it can't get a lot worse for the NWA. The only way it can go is up, right? Now, of course, I'll be watching next week. We'll see if they can get back to normal. But the NWA needs to learn a big lesson from all of this. Because this is a mistake you can only make once.